Today I'm going to talk about 3 of the biggest concerns people have about the LUMIX S9 and why they probably don't matter. And I'm also going to talk about some of the things that really do matter and what makes this camera so very, very good. I've just spent 3 weeks traveling around Japan getting to know the LUMIX S9 very, very well and using the S9 every single day in a lot of different varying conditions. And I got to say, the camera has performed absolutely magnificently. And there are 3 things that people have been very concerned about with the LUMIX S9, and maybe they really just don't need to be. The mechanical shutter is the one that tends to top the list. People are very concerned about any camera that doesn't have a mechanical shutter. As it turns out, I've been using the electronic shutter on lots of cameras for a very long time. There are specific instances when you might see an impact of using the electronic shutter as opposed to the mechanical, and they are very, very infrequent. If you shoot with studio flash, then the LUMIX S9 is not going to be the camera for you. It's going to be a problem. Studio flash and the readout across the sensor are not a good combination. But as it turns out, we don't use studio flash for our studio work anymore. We do everything with continuous lights instead. We use the continuous LEDs for most of our studio work, and even when we take lighting on site, it's really good using this instead of flash because it's not interrupting other people in the room, and that's kind of a big deal if you're shooting in a restaurant. Continuous light gives you an opportunity to see better what creatively is happening inside your camera. You don't have to guess where the light's going to come from and review it after the shot. You see it in real time. We just use continuous lights. It's a no-brainer. The absence of an EVF on the LUMIX S9 is another point of concern for people. And if you're shooting a lot with telephoto, then I think that's a legitimate concern. If you're shooting bird photography with, say, the Sigma 60 to 600mm, then yeah, you're going to want to line up that shot. And that's very difficult to do if you're waving about looking at a screen on the back of a camera. You need to hold it up to the eye and get your line of sight. It is hard enough sometimes to get birds in flight even into the frame of view that you have with a telephoto lens. So having that EVF in those sort of situations is going to make a difference. So this camera is not made for wildlife photography. It is an urban camera. It is for travel. It is light. It is for everyday use. And as an everyday course, I'm not shooting wildlife. The flip side to not having an EVF means you're shooting everything off the rear screen. I've seen people say that they couldn't possibly use the rear screen in bright sunlight, that it's going to be not bright enough. That screen is very bright. It works great in bright sunlight. It's really not a problem. One of the issues I have seen recently is how people use their rear screen instead of an EVF. They're holding it up like this to try to take their shots. And I don't think that's a really good way to use a camera. The whole point of using the rear screen is that now you can actually see your subject, you can talk to your subject, and you can take the shots down low. The way that I like to recommend to use this sort of camera is that you hold the weight with one hand, and that's very simple. And you're using the screen to tilt up towards your face like that. So you can hold it down low and you can control it with the other hand. And this means you're changing your perspective a little bit too. You're using it in a similar way to how we used to shoot with medium format when we would look down through the viewfinder from the top of the camera. And it's a really good way to work. And of course, with these viewfinders, you can simply tilt them up if you're in a crowd and you're trying to get above the highlight. And a lot of the times what I'm doing, I'm shooting it like this because I'm actually shooting portrait anyway. There's a lot of creativity that you can tap into simply by using the Flippy Screen instead of the viewfinder. And I'm going to go one step further and I'm going to say I will not buy a camera that doesn't have the Flippy Screen. I need this. I use this so much. It is a powerful tool for me to do better work. So yeah, not having an EVF, not a big deal. Now, the recording limits that have been set for the 4K and 6K video, that's more of a concern. But I think to a very small audience. I do agree that this is probably a mistake by Panasonic. I think they've made a misstep here in implementing the limited cap for video recordings. And I can see why they're doing it, because they're trying to achieve a rating where you will be able to use this camera for -10 to 40 degrees. 40 degrees. I don't do a lot of interviews at 40 degrees, especially not for half an hour's worth. When I'm recording for extended periods of time, I need a controlled climate to do that in. So I think that's just not a good way for them to implement the limitations on this camera. And there's a part of me that hopes that maybe at some point down the future, they might actually update the firmware to reduce those limits. There's not many people who are going to be interested in this style of camera who actually need to record for longer than 15 minutes. So the three things that people get concerned about, the mechanical shutter, the EVF, and the recording limits, maybe they're not as big a deal as we like to make out, especially when you think about what you are getting. And this camera is chock full of really good technology. It is just a very excellent camera in a very small body. Let's look at things like the LUT feature, because that's a little bit unusual, and tying it into the app as much as Panasonic have for this particular camera is a very bold move. And what it means is once you have connected to the app, you can access a heap of LUTs that you can apply to your camera, both for stills and for video as well. I'm not into avoiding the processing and trying to skip all that stuff. I'm not trying to go direct from camera to broadcast. But what I am trying to do is to get a better idea of what my final image is going to look like when I'm shooting. It's really helpful for me to be able to apply a little bit of treatment in camera so I can see the preview is closer to how I'm going to do my treatment when I get it back on the computer. And the great thing with the implementation of LUTs on this is that you can go onto the app, you can find a LUT that you like, you can browse through a really great collection from some genuinely creative people and use their LUTs. Or you can just design your own. And that is really the key, because for certain kinds of shoots, you might want to create a certain kind of look. One of the things that we do a lot with our food photography is that we'd like to bring up the black tones so that we get more of a matte, papery kind of feel, so that the blacks aren't really heavily black. This is really good for a low contrast kind of vibe where you're toning down the contrast of the overall scene and some of the shadows are coming through because your blacks are no longer properly black. I can do this in camera now. I can get a better idea as to the potential from a particular scene as to how that's going to play through in the final image. Or to put it another way, if your picture style or standard preview on the camera is rendering an image that you just don't like for whatever reason, the style of the image is not coming through in a way that you're going to use anyway, you might be put off from even taking the shot. It might not look like the shot that you want to take. So by using the real-time LUTs and having a treatment that is more in style with your treatment style, then you're less likely to turn away from some of those beautiful moments. The real headline with this camera is the size. It is so incredibly small, it makes my little tiny f1.8 lenses look huge. So why does size matter, and does it really matter at all? Because the issue is not so much how big is the camera in my hand. The issue is more, how big is it in my bag? Because that's where I'm going to struggle with a bigger camera. I don't think it actually matters what camera you're holding when you go out to do some street photography, or really for most styles of photography. The size of the camera is not a big factor, but the size in the bag really does matter. How much room it takes up in the pack and how much of a barrier it is to you wanting to take it out and go and do some photography in the first place, that's a genuine issue. It's not just about those of us who struggle with the weight of a DSLR. It's not just about those of us who might have some health issues. And it's not just about if you want to go hiking in the mountains and you simply want to carry as little weight as possible. All those are valid reasons. But it's about how inclined am I going to be to pick up that camera and stick it in the bag when I walk out the door. I get all the features I need in a very tiny form factor. I get amazing features. I get essentially a professional camera that I can use for almost any task that I want to do, and I can take it with me at any time I like. To me, there's actually no compromise here at all. I'm not concerned about the mechanical shutter. I have been out shooting for months with cameras that don't use mechanical shutters, and I don't have any issues. It's not been a barrier to any of the work I do. The EVF is not an issue. I take better photos by having more flexibility with my Flippy Screen. And the recording time, that's a specific issue when you're recording a YouTube like this. And for the time being, I'm just not going to be able to use this camera to shoot a 30-minute video. For me, there simply is no compromise here at all. It's easy to focus too much on the electronic shutter or the EVF or the capture recording times. These issues are actually very, very minimal for the vast majority of people who would otherwise enjoy the LUMIX S9. If you're worried about those issues, I suggest you go to a store and feel this camera in your own hands first. Feel how small it is. pay attention to the 24 megapixel sensor, the 96 megapixel high-res mode that it has, the 5.9K 10-bit video, the pre-burst continuous capture, the amazing stabilization, the phase detect autofocus, the exceptional battery life that I have experienced when I'm out shooting, that custom mode dial that lets you quickly jump to whatever shooting mode you need, and of course the gorgeous range of L-mount lenses that you can get for it. There is a lot to love about this very, very little camera. My biggest problem is that I may have to go out and buy smaller lenses now because my Sigma 35mm f1.2 is going to look ridiculously huge on this camera body. And that's a good problem to have. Thank you very much for watching this video, and please have a look around my YouTube channel. I've got a bunch of other videos on this channel that talk about the art of photography and how to be creative, and maybe you'll enjoy some of those too. Have a great day.